can you help me just understand just some historical context? Back hundreds of years ago when America established the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the forefathers were debating it, were there still two, how was the political divide then? And how were these issues debated?
Do you mean around power projection outside of the United States?
I'm literally, no, just within the United States. When the forefathers were debating the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and I know there were certain things that were written anonymously, but during that period, the people, because I am clueless to this, the forefathers themselves, were they Republicans? Were they Democrats? Was it a mix?
So those parties didn't exist.
Okay, so what existed then?
I would say
North
that,
and the South.
I mean, there were profound geographic divisions. So the main question in like the early American Republic was, to what extent are we a coherent project, a coherent state? There was a lot of opposition to the Constitution for the reason that people in all of the different states were suspicious that a federal government would rob them of their liberties. And each state had a very distinct culture, a distinct history, like reason for formation. Like literally different populations were sent there or chose to immigrate there from Europe. And that created different state cultures. And so there was this sense that every state was sovereign. And, much like in the European Union today, that joining this larger federation would result in a compromise of state sovereignty. And so actually the anti-federalists were just as vocal and popular as the Federalists were. And in many states, ratification of the Constitution happened through like some really strong armed tactics, like people being tarred and feathered and like physically like beat up in public. It was a violent era. And so, there was a question of, is America a country? Like, is it a coherent project? And eventually the Federalists won. I would suggest, though I'm not a historian of this era, because the logic of common defense was still so fresh. There was still the sense that if we didn't unite, if we didn't at the very least share in armed forces, we were vulnerable to being, taken over again by our former colonist or colonial power. Or perhaps a different one.
Or civil war.
Right. Yes, certainly. That was a concern as well.
Or state-by-state conflict.
I think probably more pressing was the concern that, we just liberated ourselves from the British Empire, but they could be back. And in fact, they were back.
Right.
And so we need to hang together. But like Washington wanted to dissolve the military. He didn't believe that the United States should have a standing army. And this is why in the Constitution, it makes reference to well-regulated militias. This notion that, citizens should have the capacity to defend themselves. They should be ready, but it needs to be a citizen army, not a professional standing army. That is an instrument of tyranny. And look where we are now.
Yeah, when we had the Brexit vote for the UK to leave the EU, I really struggled with the decision because as a Bitcoiner, I was like, well, independence is better, smaller states are better, yada, yada. Yeah. But I really struggled with the decision. I ended up speaking to one of my friends, and he said the great thing about the EU is it's one of the most successful peace projects the world has ever seen. Mm-hmm. We have not gone to war in, countries in the EU have not gone to war. We've had war in Europe, we had the Balkans, but countries within the EU have not gone to war with each other because we are united. We might disagree with each other, but we're united. And so that's always kind of like weighed heavily on me. And that's, for all the bureaucracy and the inefficiencies you get, the fact that you remove that incentive for war is kind of, it's a big reason to vote to remain because I don't know, it just feels like the right thing to do. I'm not really going anywhere with that, by the way.
Well, I think what you're pointing to is that there was an economic friction that was removed in trade between European countries. that did create a kind of rising tide of prosperity that incentivized the people to keep the peace.
Yeah.
However, that there was a trade-off there. You created a larger administrative class in Brussels,
Yes.
who then could dictate terms to every member of this union.
Brussels and Strasbourg. Do you know
Yes.
about the EU moving to Strasbourg every month for 3 days? Do you know about this?
Okay, tell me.
Okay, so I mean, I won't get the details correct, but in the establishment of the EU, I think it was the French disagreed with the idea that it would, be placed. It would just exist singularly within Belgium, and so the compromise was 3 days a month. The entire EU. I mean, they literally in lorries. They pack everything up. They move to Strasbourg for 3 days. They operate there for 3 days and they go back. I think the cost is like 150 million. Have you found it?
I'm just having a look now.
Yeah, I think it's at the cost of 150 million a year.
Wow.
Yeah, here we go. Oh, your EU Parliament's 140 million a year moves to Strasbourg. A waste of money, but will it ever be scrapped? So, we want the history. Can you scroll down a bit more, Danny? Yeah, the EU Parliament's triangle of locations, Strasbourg, Brussels, and Luxembourg, were formed to balance the original smaller European Union. Among the costs accrued by the monthly relocation, however, includes transportation for thousands of parliament officials, political groups, parliamentary assistants, and freelance interpreters, in addition to paperwork that is transported by trucks between locations. In March, plenary resolution of the EP budget, it was noted that the environmental impact is significant, stands at between 11,000 and 19,000 tons of CO2 a year, the equivalent of driving between yada yada. I mean, it's just fucking ridiculous. They literally move it. You can understand why they argue through it at the time, but I think we're in an era where that is unrequired. But yeah, it is. There's a lot of inefficiency there.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned coherent state. Would you say it's an incoherent state now then?
Well, there are significant incentives to maintaining the integrity of the U.S. state. One is, much like the European Union, interstate commerce. I mean, if there were to be a breakup of the United States, the complexity of, setting up bilateral trade relations between all of the states would make doing business in any of the former U.S. states prohibitive for a lot of companies. And again, this common defense, it's maybe it's not so hard to imagine the United States fending off a Chinese invasion. It's hard to imagine Mississippi fending off a Chinese invasion. And so there are, in terms of economy and military sovereignty, really strong reasons to cohere. The question is, what beyond that should the federal government do? And I think that's really where the open question is.
So maintaining a common defense, there's a solid and good argument for that, but removing the power or the amount that the federal government gets involved in would make the country more efficient. It would make it less imperialist, and that could lead to, I mean, how much of a common goal do you need? If as long as you have strong states' rights and states' decisions, people have the ability to move and live where they want anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, it's a question of to what extent do we maintain the state apparatus that we built? Like, just to give you a sense of this, there are currently 18 federal intelligence agencies.
18.
Like, they've been exponentially kind of growing. Like, there's a hockey stick curve. And that's not to say anything of all of the, federal, basically police, law enforcement agencies, and then the state law enforcement, municipal, county law enforcement. So that there's this massive and growing police apparatus that exists at all levels of government. And to what extent, do people in Texas, for example, need to be subsidizing with their tax dollars, all 18 of these intelligence agencies? I don't know.
I'm not sure how to close this one out.
Let's open it.
Well, yeah. I mean, like I said to you, what next? You said build a coalition, but part of me thinks maybe things have to get worse before they get better. I think, I don't know the answer. Like, I'm totally intrigued by this subject, but I'm massively out of my depth adding to it because I'm not an American. I don't understand historical context. There's little I know about it. What you're going to have to close this one out for me, Natalie. What question do you put out there?
No, I would like to end with an invitation to your listeners to consider what it would be to build liberty. What does that mean as a positive project? Over the next few years, one of the reasons that I do research into political economy is because I would actually like to turn these principles into a set of actionable policies that something like a political, not necessarily party, but movement can form around. And this is why I'm actually genuinely inspired by the Solidarity movement that took down the communist state in Poland. I grew up, hearing stories of this, and it was very much alive when I was a child. This was a coalition of right and left and people of different religions and atheists all across the spectrum to suggest self-determination is something that's worth fighting for. And I think that spirit of solidarity can be rekindled again.
Can you lead it?
Well, I'm out here trying.
I mean, you have the historical context with your parents. It would feel only right that you were to carry that torch on here in the US and drive forward that solidarity.
Absolutely.
Well, you would have my full support and backing, and the limited resources I have to help you. I hope you do it. I'm so sick of it. I'm so sick of it. I'm regret anything I've got involved in that is drives polarization. I've got zero interest in it anymore. I just care about trying to bring people together. I don't want to say it in a Lex Friedman, everyone, but at the same time, like, there is something to be said for that. Like, we need to bring people together.
Absolutely. This is just the beginning.
Yes. Me and Danny are going to be looking for out there looking for the Natalie Smolenski solidarity movement.
Yes.
Creating solidarity between the left and the right, and hopefully ending this bullshit. Natalie, I was well out of my depth today, but I absolutely love talking to you and listening to you talk about this, and I wish you all the success. Where do you want to send people?
All right. So txbitcoinfoundation.org.
I owe you some money.
Oh, well.
No, I do. I've totally forgot about that. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to send you some money.
So we want to do, we're already publishing the Satoshi Papers. This is the first academic journal. We're bringing together historians, economists, social scientists, philosophers to write about why Bitcoin matters for human societies and for state-society relations specifically. So that book is coming out and by the end of this year. And then we also want to do some fun events. Like, we want to engage people. We want to bring like some really smart people who aren't necessarily Bitcoiners, but who write about the stuff that we've been talking about today. Because I think Bitcoiners are some of the most intellectually curious people that I've ever met, and they're hungry for this. So let's do it.
That was the question I didn't ask. I forgot I have a Bitcoin show. What does the role of Bitcoin play in this solidarity?
Well, it's a reminder that all power is not top down from the state. In fact, value is an emergent phenomenon. It emerges bottom up as individual people opt into something that is better than what they're currently living. And so what Bitcoin is, first and foremost, is an alternative. It's a new way of imagining. It's a new way of relating. People have forgotten what a freedom to transact means, that I can just pay you for something without having to involve a third-party intermediary, without having to prove my identity to some panopticon, without having to demonstrate that I'm a good and loyal subject. No, the government is subject to me. I am the source of sovereignty. You are the source of sovereignty. So let's take that back.